is truly an honor to introduce our two guests tonight. Representative Karen May has represented the 58th District in the Illinois House of Representatives since 2001. In Springfield, she chairs the Environmental Health Committee and the Renewable Energy Committee, and is vice chairman of the Health Care Availability Access Committee. She also sits on the Electric Utility Oversight Committee, the Environment and Energy Committee, the Mass Transit Committee, the Public Policy and Accountability Committee, the O'Hare Airport Environmental Impact Committee, the Medicaid Reform Committee, the Personnel and Pensions Committee, and the Police and Fire Pension Reform Committee. I don't know how you'd cover all those. A former member of the Highland Park City Council and Historic Preservation Commission, she has a bachelor's degree in communications from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She is the founder and the president of a public relations advertising agency and worked as a newspaper reporter and a freelance writer. She has also served in many civic, educational, and charitable organizations in Highland Park and Lake County. She is married to Morton, and she has 2 children.
Yes.
And some grandchildren.
2 grandchildren who live in Highland Park now, and 2 more on the way.
Wow.
Twins on the way.
Karen is indeed busy. Karen has made a point of always being accessible to her constituents, and we are absolutely delighted that she's with us tonight. And they're going to do a little different format tonight and both just sort of talk back and forth, so I'm going to introduce both of them. And State Senator Susan Garrett doesn't need much of an introduction. She is currently serving her 3rd term in the Illinois Senate, serving the 29th District, which she has served from 2002 to the present. Susan was named Majority Caucus Whip for the 97th General Assembly by Senate President John Cullerton. Prior to serving in the Senate, Senator Garrett served 2 terms in the Illinois House of Representatives from 1998 to 2001. Her district includes parts of Lake and suburban Cook County, including all or parts of the following communities: Bannockburn, Deerfield, Des Plaines, Fort Sheridan, Glencoe, Glenview, Highland Park, Highwood, Knollwood, Lake Bluff, Lake Forest, Mount Prospect, Niles, Northbrook, Park Ridge, Prospect Heights, and Riverwoods. Again, a huge job. Susan earned her bachelor's degree from Lake Forest College, and she and her husband Scott reside in Lake Forest and have 2 grown children, Brett and Elizabeth. Any grandchildren?
1 grandchild.
1 grandchild.
Thank God.
As many of you know, Susan is also past president of our own League of Women Voters. She's one of our own. Senator Garrett also has always made it a priority to be highly accessible to all of her constituents. As testimony to that fact, she is here with us tonight to discuss the state of the state. They both truly epitomize what the League is all about, and for that we salute you. They've asked me to moderate tonight. A lot of you have been to League forums before. Susan and Karen are going to just generally have a discussion of the state, and then after they have had a discussion, we'll open it up for questions. And we'll talk a little bit about that at that time, okay?
I don't know. Melanie's going to start, so I mean, I'll start with just a couple comments. And I don't know, did you mention, Melanie, that I was vice president of the League of Women Voters in Highland Park and cut my teeth doing voter service work and holding candidates forums and all too, so very, very active in League over the years. And this isn't a debate because we really get along. I think that Susan and I have been a great team, support on issues and psychologically when things get tough in Springfield. But it has been, it was a tough session. The last couple years have been really tough, but a lot of it has been getting back to fiscal and financial stability and earning the trust of voters back. So we've done a lot of reforms. I wanted to talk a little bit about pension reform because 2 years ago we created a major pension reform creating what they call the two-tier system. As you mentioned, I am on the pension committee. I came in rather late in my career, but decided to take it on just because it was such a big issue. And I think I hear more about pensions than even about revenues and anything else in this area. Just really hear a lot about pensions. So we did a bill that created, for the first time ever, reduced benefits for employees, for new hires. As you're probably well aware, because you're very active in the league, our Article 13 of our state constitution, put in during the 70s convention, is one of the strongest in the nation, saying that you can't reduce pension benefits. And that's why everything we've have done so far has been on the future hires, not taking anything away from current employees. I also did a major pension bill this last year, and it was in reaction to pension spiking right here in our backyard. Maybe you read the story in the Tribune about the executive director of the Park District of Highland Park who was paid $425,000, and it was just in the last couple years so that he could get a pension that would result in well over $1 million. And he retired a young man. So I came up with a very strong plan dealing with pensions, mostly the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, which is Park District, which is city employees, and the public works employees and all with the city. But stopped with some of the spiking issues, spiking salaries at the end, ending double dipping for all state pension systems, not just IMRF. And there were a couple other programs, one called ECHO, the Enhanced County Option or something, that gave huge benefits to certain elected county officials, and costing like 17% instead of a normal 6 or 7% benefit. And then there was a sheriff's employee too, that they could use some of their credit from when they were in non-hazard jobs, that they could get 10 years of credit at the higher rate. Police and fire often get a little bit more pension because they're putting their life on the line all the time. Certain public employees that have their lives at risk do get a higher benefit, but this, they took 10 years of not the high risk benefit and got the same higher price. So those were ended, a lot of things like that. Continuing on the path of pension reform, Fox News came out with a story just about a month ago that there were some Chicago city employees who had gone on to become union stewards at a much higher salary, and they continued to accrue pension benefits even at the very high salary, costing taxpayers a lot of money. I've already drafted that bill, as did Representative Tom Cross, but his was limiting the amount of, like, the high level of it. Mine was just ending the practice, which we think is just a better way to go, and I'm trying to call it in veto session. So we have made progress, but you probably heard of another bill that got a lot of press, and you probably read about, was House Bill 512, and it was really reducing benefits for current employees. It was, and there was a provision put in it that said that every 3 years they would true up. So while I'm open to some issues like that, as I polled teachers and other people in the district, that 3-year true up was really problematic, because after 3 years, if things weren't going right, even though they were like doubling the contribution, our teachers now pay 9.5% of their salary in. So it's not a small contribution, they're paying quite a bit into it. But even after they increased their contribution, if it didn't stabilize and really wasn't paying away, that they could do it every 3 years. And that just seemed grossly unfair, because there are really two sides of the debate. A lot of the people who are taxpayers seem to say, well, we can't afford it, we can't afford these benefits, we have to cut back. And then the public employees, their response is, well, we were promised this, we've paid in dutifully, but honestly, some of the levels of government haven't put in what they've wanted to, what they should have done all these years. And therefore, that really is the rub. So I felt that the provision that they could true it up or start charging more after 3 years was problematic, because if the state government or any local government was not paying what they were supposed to be paying, the employees would be left holding the bag. So I am on the pension committee. I'm chairing one of our working groups. We've got 4 different subcommittees, pulling it apart, seeing how we can try to get to some consensus. The employees were very, very much against the 512 bill for the 3-year true-up and some other reasons too. We're seeing if we can do, in a bipartisan way, come to some way that we can add stability to our pension systems. They really do need stability. They're radically underfunded. One of my colleagues Mike Tryon from McHenry County, that co-chairs the subcommittee with me, has read a Fitch report that says that 70% funding is enough, where our goal has always been to get to 90% funding. So it's a huge issue facing us, one of our big financial issues, not totally solved yet. But while the overarching issue is sometimes very hard to get to a compromise, something we can move forward, the smaller issues are ones that we can chip away at, as I did this year, as I will do with the new bill I've issued, to try to get to stability there. One bill that I hope will come up in the veto session is my healthcare cooperative bill. As there is money available in Washington, to help fund some cooperatives. The Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce is a huge supporter of this bill. I have, for almost all of my 10 years in Springfield, worked on some way to do a system for small businesses, whether it be a cooperative, some sort of a fund or whatever, because as a small business owner myself for more than 20 years, it was a huge issue, getting an affordable product for employees. So what I've seen in studying this and being vice chair of the healthcare committee is that the employee can pay about a third, the employer can pay about a third, what they consider is affordable, but the other third is hard to come by. But with some federal money being available, the Department of Insurance and I really felt this was a year to try to move the cooperative bill. The insurance industry is against it, but I passed it with only 5 negative votes, but it got stalled in the Senate. So we're trying to find out what's going on over in the Senate with that bill, because with federal dollars available, it would be so important to get this in place now for our small businesses. And I believe the Chicagoland Chamber would reach out and look at other chambers and all in the area, and it could come out and help the suburbs too. So, Susan, I don't know what you want to jump in. I wanted to talk about pensions, though, because I've been intimately involved in that. Okay. Pick up what you want to talk about the next year.
I just want to clarify, I think on the pension bill there's 3 different options. There's the option where, and this is...
That's true, yes.
This is the reform...
The 512. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the reform bill where if the current pensioners want to keep the benefits the same, they would be required to pay in more. If they want to pay in the same amount, the benefits would be fewer. And if they wanted to try something totally new, there could be a 401k type approach to pension. So these are the 3 options that are included in this pension reform. So there would be a choice for pensioners, and most of this is happening in the House. So there are working committees going on. I'm not sure that this will be brought up during veto session, but at least it's been out there and there's been a lot of discussion. I want to talk a little bit about veto session because that comes up October 26th, I think, and then we go back again November 10th. One of the big issues that you've all heard about or experienced in some way is the ComEd, There was a ComEd bill which included a smart grid, and then, you know, we all lost a lot of power, and communities decided that, you know, the current bill as it stood, and it did pass both the House and the Senate, was really not acceptable, that we needed to put more oversight in, and certainly more accountability for ComEd. So there is going to be that discussion. We don't know, the governor has vetoed the bill. We don't know exactly how we're going to go about resolving the situation. The heart and soul of the bill probably is good, but there's an additional cost for customers, and we want to make sure that in the long run, even though those costs may be justified as we improve on our smart grid, that there are also accountability measures. So when our lights go out, or the power goes out and the skies are blue, that we get some sort of, well, ComEd would be penalized, but there's some sort of reimbursement for our refrigerated items, and the list goes on and on. So recently, this summer, we called a meeting together, actually in Lake Forest, and we invited all of the municipal leaders, mayors, and townships, every single governmental entity, including the County of Lake, to come and say, instead of complaining about all the things that ComEd isn't doing during these power outages, what can we all do together to make it right? For instance, if you were driving along, I live right near 60 and Waukegan Road. The light was out, cars were backed up. It was kind of frightening. Maybe the municipalities could take on that burden and do something about it instead of waiting for the power to go back on. So we talked a lot about things like that, and in the end, it's called the Northwest Municipal Conference, which is a group comprised of many suburban leaders, came up with legislation that will provide for the accountability and the transparency and the oversight. They put together a white paper. We are having that drafted into legislation, and that will certainly be part of the trailer bill. I do believe that will be called at some level. My concern is that, like many things in Springfield, we find out what exactly the words are, you know, sometimes a day before we're supposed to vote, and that's maybe a lot of time. So I want to make sure that the information on this quote-unquote trailer bill gets vetted well in advance, so we don't miss anything, if in fact that's going to be the future path for our ComEd customers. There's another bill that I believe is going to be coming up. You've read in the newspapers about all of the businesses who are threatening to leave the state, from Sears to Motorola to CME. I could probably come up with a couple of different names. But what they're doing, because they're high profile and they can do it, they can go to the governor and to us and say, look, if you don't give me some tax breaks or tax incentives, we're going to leave the state. We've got offers from all the surrounding states, or we can go anywhere we want and get a better deal. So there's a lot of debate about this. And I think, so I'm chairman of the Commerce Committee, and I've held hearings on it, but it's an interesting issue. The corporate tax increase, the corporate taxes did increase, and really a lot of the businesses, the big Fortune 500 type companies in the Chicago or in the state of Illinois, are using that as a reason to go somewhere else. So they are expecting, and in the past when they've done this, they've been able to get these special tax breaks. But what's also happening at the same time is that the small to medium-sized businesses who don't have that same name recognition or high profile are saying, wait a minute, you know, don't we count too? Aren't we allowed, if these guys get tax breaks, are we prohibited from getting them? So there's a process that you go through to get these tax breaks, and we're trying to shine a light on that process and make sure that these tax breaks aren't negotiated behind closed doors, and that it's an open process. Everybody knows what the expectations and what the outcomes are, and who really qualifies. So I've had hearings on that, and it's really, really interesting, because nobody wants to lose businesses. On the other hand, you want to make it fair, so if there's X number of dollars that we can afford for tax breaks or incentives, that those dollars just don't go to 2 or 3 companies, that we spread it across, especially, I believe, to the small to medium-sized businesses who really probably need it in order to stay up and running. So those are 3 of the main issues that I've heard that are going to be coming up. There'll be a slew of other bills that the governor has vetoed that we'll talk about, but those are 3 issues that I think you're probably familiar with. So I was going to talk a little bit about the climate in Springfield as best I possibly can. So Karen is absolutely right. The state is on a path to financial stability. There's no question whether or not you're for or against the tax increase. The tax increase did help that. But we still have, $8-9 billion in unpaid bills that, our revenue is pretty much close to where we thought it would be. Maybe it's a little bit higher, but it's going to be extremely challenging to make sure that we continue to pay down our debt. We've given new rules to ourselves on how we budget. We can't spend more than we take in. Imagine that. So the state has been really, really good about borrowing money over the years. So we have a lot of debt. And I'm not opposed to borrowing, but I think there comes a time when you've really got to tighten your belt and look at your spending policies and make sure that they're in line with the kinds of dollars that you're going to be bringing in. So that was a policy that was actually passed. We were also able to make sure that we have to cap our spending at maximum of a 2% increase every year. So these are restraints that we're putting on ourselves, weaning ourselves from, throwing money away and spending more than we really have. But there's a fight going on because when you do this, you actually hurt a lot of people. There are a lot of human service facilities and small organizations that help out the government and help out people in just about every community in this entire state. And they aren't, maybe their budget's been slashed, maybe the program's been terminated, and those are the kinds of things that we hear about on a regular basis, and those are the things that really hit home. So we want to make sure that there's prioritization in the budget, that in the past it's always been, well, we've got, $60 billion and here's how we're going to spend it, but now the budgeteers are really prioritizing the types of expenditures and making sure that we get the outcomes with results. So if the expenditures on an organization that helps people with disabilities, we want to measure how well they do with the dollars that they're receiving from the taxpayers. So that's another huge innovation that Illinois is doing for the first time. Not a lot of states have a budget process like that, but I think it's really going to serve us well in the long run. And I'll just talk about one more thing, then Karen jump in. We did, talking about reforms, I sit on the Education Committee too, and have since I was elected to serve in the House. But we had a major education reform bill that was very collaborative. So we had the unions and we had the administrators and we had a lot of education groups who don't necessarily all sit down together at the same table, and decide how can we make sure that the best teachers are not the ones when a school has to cut back, that there's a process in place that just because you've been a teacher for 40 years, that doesn't mean you get to stay. It's going to be based on the type of work you've done, the qualifications, and other things. So all of that has been worked out. They also, obviously you've read this, about making sure that the school day is longer, that tenure, we're able to deal with tenure. So there are different facets of that bill that there was almost unanimous agreement except for the Chicago Public Schools. And that's sort of still going on. I think Karen Lewis is I think that's who it is. Karen Lewis, yeah. So she and Rahm Emanuel are kind of duking it out. But overall, I think, Illinois should be very proud of the fact that we've made some giant steps in education reform. And, nothing about, looking at Wisconsin and all the turbulence that they went through with their, some of their problems with unions and how they dealt with it. I really was very pleased with the way Illinois handled that. So I will turn it over to Karen.
Okay. When you talked about the budgeting process, it really was important. This budgeting for outcomes is very important. Instead of starting somewhere where we were before, we will get to a process where every program has to prove itself or it won't be funded. But it is tough because with the reduced spending, and we did make cuts, there are hearings going on facilities closures that are very, very, very painful. I think that a lot of people from the area have a disabled child elsewhere around the state, and that they'll just be devastated. They don't want their children to move, that they feel that their facility can handle them the best. I did want to mention on the business climate too, Susan did a pretty nice job of covering that, but it was kind of funny how our governor to the north said open for business. Their tax rate is higher than ours. So it was just, it was just posturing. While it is important to be cognizant of the tax rate, and I think that after things settle down, at least 1% of the income tax is scheduled to phase out fairly soon. I think there's a pretty strong movement afoot to maybe phase it out for corporations first to promote job growth. And on going back a little bit to the ComEd outings, I did have, I'm a member of the Public Utilities Committee, so did ask for a hearing that was held at Highland Park Country Club to allow everyone from Evanston all the way to the Wisconsin border to talk about it, because our municipalities felt, and I felt like our offices were, a community service extension of ComEd, because with 5 days of outages and people being out, they just didn't know what to do except to reach out to the community or to our offices. And while I was happy that we had numbers to turn in, I just don't think someone should have to call their state rep or their state senator to get their lights back on. What we found, though, were some pocket issues where they would have 12 or more outages a year, and they really weren't getting the attention. This has been an ongoing problem for this area for years and years and years, and Lake Bluff actually had set a very good model of sitting down with the village manager and having a plan to address some of these outages. And when Glencoe and other towns were having problems, I think it was about 2007, I used that model and I worked with ComEd to get them to give a report back to each municipality once a year. They were required to file a report of the 1% worst performing circuits with the ICC, but it was as big as the old Chicago phone book. They didn't break it out by town so any municipality knew, and they buried it somewhere on the ICC website. We found it, but you couldn't find anything. So I got them to agree to give it to each municipality. And they've been doing that, but the municipality said that the data was sort of homogenized and pasteurized and really wasn't very usable to them. So that is a very, very, very big important part of dealing with this. And the ComEd trucks are rolling because of all the, I guess because of all the stink that was raised with the hearing and the meetings and all. They have started grappling with some of these issues. But the fact that Lake Bluff alone had 40, I mean, Susan and I were at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, and I followed the village manager back. They had 47 downed power lines on the day 2 of the storm. And we sat in a dark village hall with the ComEd people talking about it and what a stress it's putting on the police department trying to guard, and how it's totally unsafe for residents of the community if there's a downed power line and public safety vehicles or an ambulance can't get through. So it's been ongoing, but they need to have the plan of action of how they're going to address everything, I think, before any of the North Shore legislators will vote to override the governor's veto. I see it, I'm on the Public Utilities Committee, so I could call for the hearing too, but I see it as a formula rate issue. They're calling it a smart rate bill, a smart grid bill, but it's a formula rate. Every 2 or 3 years, ComEd goes before the Illinois Commerce Commission, which has the right to approve whatever rate. But they ask for a lot, and then the ICC disallows from there. But this is a formula rate tied to the financial rate. And they have their pension, their bonuses, and the cost of presenting the rate are in a formula. Some of the stuff you read isn't true. It is not pre-approving a rate increase. The first bill did that, but that has totally changed. That doesn't stop some people from saying that. ComEd would have to go back to the ICC every year and have them check on especially the pensions, bonuses, and cost of the rate case. So there's some people are saying it guarantees the 10.25 rate return on equity. And it really doesn't, because they can knock off these other things. It's in the public sector and in the utility arena of a monopoly. They can knock off these other things. It's an opportunity to make that much, but it's not really returning that much. But I think the whole country is looking to see whether this formula rate gets approved. But it really is necessary to do something. It's a $2.5 billion investment in the infrastructure. I think that there's a pretty unanimous feeling from municipalities and other people who've been dealing with ComEd that they haven't been investing in the infrastructure in such a way. I'm just afraid that if this doesn't get through, that they're not going to put the investment in infrastructure, and there where are we? We really need to invest in the infrastructure. If I could switch just a little bit and talk just, I do chair telecom for the first time this year, and I was at Wireless University in San Diego for a couple days, and it was fascinating. So while we all get bogged down in revenues and job creation, it sometimes is fascinating to go to a conference and see what's out there. And they were showing us, there's a Qualcomm company that has just grown like crazy, and they were showing us they were using platforms on your smartphone, and that if you download this one program they're working on, that you can put your phone up and you can look at something at the grocery store and it can tell you everything that's in it. It can play the commercial, it can do all kinds of things. And of course, all the legislators there were thinking, gee, how great would that be, that you just go along and you see a billboard or your yard sign and you put the camera and then it starts playing your commercial or starts giving all of your bio or something. But it really is amazing, some of the things that are working with the smartphones and the tablets. There's a lot going on. We talked a little bit about how to incent it and about changing laws. I passed 2 bills this year that had to do with the telecom. One was collecting money from 911. There are a lot of prepaid phone cards and prepaid phones. It's a growing segment of the market, and there really isn't a standard way to collect the fees from those to support our 911 services. I think if you ask the local 911 services, our fire departments, they would tell you that they are being stressed by not getting enough money as people switch from their landline phones to cell phones. They don't get as much per cell phone as they did for the landline, so our monies for 911 are decreasing. But this was a bill supported by the telecom industry to make sure that the money on the prepaid phone cards, that they get some money for that to go to 911. So that was, it's a type of thing that's happening around the country. I think about, 15 or 18 states are doing it now to support 911. And then the other one was that our telecom laws didn't allow any Amber Alerts and things to go out on 911 unless the police approved it. So there's a new bracelet that uses a GPS chip that's particularly good for autistic children or people with Alzheimer's, so that if they can wear this, it's got a GPS chip. And if they're gone missing, that you can find them. But the public safety doesn't necessarily want anyone to be able to access 911. So we worked out the rules that you could access it if they were registered in advance, and that if the family who noticed the person missing actually filled out a missing persons report, so that they just weren't deluged with a lot of people with saying, oh, my person's gone, they've got a bracelet, not getting the receipt anymore. So I do like the telecom industry and some of the things that can be done. It's very, very, very exciting. So I guess that's just a little example of when, aside from revenues and pensions and everything else, whether it be the major education reform bill or the little bills that we pass, there are still good things going on if constituents stay involved and our advocates get involved, that there are ways we can take advantage of new technology and bring our laws into line too.
So maybe I'll just wrap up before we ask questions, we'll answer questions on transportation issues. So there's there's the tollway, there's Metro, and the CTA. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the tollway. They've raised their tolls considerably. I think 67% that was voted on, except for one, our Lake County member voted against that. But something else important is happening at the tollway, and they are looking at a toll extension of 53. Into Lake County. And this is being done, I think, for the first time with it's a blue ribbon commission that's been put together with environmentalists, people who are for it, against it, all that kind of back and forth debate that's going to happen, but experts who've been studying 53 for the last decade, times 10 maybe, I don't know. So they have public meetings. I think there's actually one, it's either Monday or Tuesday of next week. But this would be a toll road if they decide to do it. And I think the feeling is it wouldn't be like an expressway. It would be like a boulevard where cars can obviously go much faster, but it would have a totally different look than the typical toll road. So that's something to keep your eye on. I know that I'm thinking that this is happening through the Lake County Board as well. I think they're involved with it. So you might want to go on their website if you want to follow that and see when the meetings are. And then Metro, which is continuing to go through some changes. They raised their fares today. You might have read that. It just happened this morning. Interestingly, they raised the fares more for the suburbanites who take the train to go into the city. And the fees or the fares are slightly, they aren't as high as the suburban fare buyers, I guess, are. That from Chicago, they felt that they should charge much less. So I'm not sure, I totally understand that rationale, but that's something that is supposed to help Metro that is struggling with almost $100 million deficit. So Metro has been borrowing from their sort of their savings to pay for their operations, and this is a real problem. And what has not been happening both at Metro and the CTA is that they haven't improved upon their infrastructure. So these big trains, the Metro trains that we see coming through, we know that some of those cars are probably too old and they have to be replaced, as well as other things, and the same with the CTA buses. So as the budget has hit state government, as you know, it's hit everything. And I think every government entity is grappling with ways in which they can provide the same type of service. And in many cases, they're increasing fares or fees or whatever. And so many of the everyday citizens, the taxpayers, the voters, are upset because their salaries either are diminished, or some people don't have jobs anymore, or they're struggling just to hang on. So it is very much of a challenge during these difficult times. So I don't know.
Yeah, I thought of one thing to
Okay,
add.
okay.
Actually, a couple things that. Although the budget year was tight, we did work together in a collaborative fashion this year, which was refreshing considering what's going on in Washington, and at least in the House the last couple of years, the Republican and Democratic leadership didn't even talk to each other. So that was good. But the local government distributed fund, which is some money that comes back to the, to local governments from the state for them collecting some taxes for the state, was not diminished. I know that a lot of the local governments, all of the municipalities in the area, were very concerned about that, and as Susan said, their budgets are strapped and stretched very tight now. So we were able to pass a budget that was balanced without touching those funds for our local government. So hopefully that will keep them from having to raise any revenues for property taxes. And we did pass a workers' compensation reform bill, which was wanted by the business community. Some people said it could have been stronger, somebody said it should have been weaker, but we did get some workers' comp reform, which should help some of those costs to businesses. I don't know, was it 400 or 800 million? It's going to be a lot of money that will come back to businesses from not having those costs.
Yeah. So, Melanie?
Thank you. Just a couple of points of procedure. Please, when you ask a question, make it in a question form rather than a comment, and one question at a time. And of course, once you've had an opportunity to ask a question, we'll go to other members of the audience before coming back to you. And try and keep your questions short and to the point. And I know sometimes questions call for a follow-up question, which in most cases is fine, but just refrain from engaging in a back and forth conversation or debate with our guests. And with that, it's open for questions. Does anyone have some questions for Susan or Karen? In the back of the room.
I have a question regarding Senate Bill 540, and particularly the Amendment 3 that was attached to it. It has to do with Sears.
Oh, Sears. Oh, the schools.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're from we used to teach in District 300.
Yeah.
My daughter's still
Yeah.
there. So that's my concern.
Yeah.
And what's happening.
Let me repeat the question
Okay.
because I think it helps for the TV audience. There's a question about Senate Bill 540
Right.
and how it affects
And the
this.
amendment
And the
number 3.
and amendment
that was kind of
number 3.
not under.
And amendment number 3 and how it might affect the Sears School District?
Well, the school district in the community is at Hoffman Estates, I think, is where
Yeah, but
Sears is located. So
The
it's
business is located
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
School district,
Right.
300.
So what happened was in local government, or it could have been in revenue, I serve on both committees, this bill came forward that basically said that Sears is going to get some sort of a tax break, and for that, the school districts would not be receiving their anticipated revenue that they get from Sears. As a corporate citizen, they pay X number of dollars in taxes, and those dollars are divvied up accordingly, and the schools get a certain percentage of those. So there is a raging battle going on right now, whether or not to let Sears have this. I kind of touched on it earlier tonight, whether Sears should have that type of a tax break. If that happens, the school districts will lose out. I have already voted against that in committee, against the Sears thing, and I will continue to vote that way. I felt that that was just a little bit over the top. So that is going to be a big issue. But I did call, because, it's interesting. I was trying to get prepared for tonight, and so I called our staff in Springfield, and I said, what is going to happen with this bill? And I couldn't get an answer if it's going to come up, or maybe it'll just go away and nobody's going to talk about it. But if it does go away, let's say, that means that's good for the school district. They won't, lose any money. But as they said that to me, there's also, I think, a package that will include tax incentives for who knows who. So I'll keep my eye on it, and I think there'll be enough support not to cause any harm to the school district. I hope.
And I'm just using my smartphone to look it up, and it never left the Senate, so.
Other questions? Yes.
Where was the additional revenue from the tax increase applied? Was it to pensions, to pay down bills? Where was it spent?
The question is, where was the initial revenue from the tax increase allocated? Was it allocated to pensions, or where did it go?
To general revenue fund. I think the intent was to try to pay off old bills first.
Good, and they've been doing that?
I thought that they'd chopped away about $2 billion worth, Susan.
I think that some of the tax increased revenue has gone to pay down some of the outstanding bills, but we were able to make the pension payment. If we weren't able to make that pension payment, then we would have been forced to borrow, and that would have put Illinois in a very difficult predicament on our bond rating and stuff like that. So it's part of the pie. We had to, we got extra $6 billion, and that $6 billion, 4 of it went to the pension payment, and 2, as Karen said, went to pay some of our back bills. That's a neat and tidy explanation. I'm sure there'd be other ways to lay that out, but I think that's pretty much what happened.
Other questions? Jane?
Susan, you said that present pensioners, people getting pensions, would have the 3 choices they're going to have to make to pay more. What do you mean by that?
The question is to explain the sort of 3 choices that pensioners are going to have.
Let me just say, I explained it, and I'm going to let Karen, because she is on that committee, so she could probably do a better job.
Well, I don't know that you did a good job. I mean, that if people would want the exact benefit package they have now, they would have to pay more. If they want the benefit package that has been reduced, what I called the Tier 2, the reduced benefits, then they could have that without paying any extra.
In other words, we're going to have to pay more for getting a pension.
Are you, as a retiree, no. No.
Just the present.
Right, it would be for current employees. Yeah. I think that what I've said to retired teachers or others, I don't sense a lot of momentum on either side of the aisle, much stomach or will to want to reduce any payments that are being made to current retirees. Do you get any other sense in the Senate?
It's House generated. I think that there is a lot of pressure on the General Assembly to start looking at ways in which the pensions can be reformed without really causing any major pain. And I think that's why I didn't have anything to do with this, but I can say that option, the 3 options, the leadership in the House will say, on both the Republican and the Democrat side, say that it's not like forcing somebody to take just one of those 3. You have options. And other states are doing that. It's, I'm not going to make an argument for or against it, but I'm just saying that's what we're that's what we're looking at right now.
Other questions? Yes, Mary.
What about the expansion of gambling?
I forgot that.
The question is, what about the expansion of gambling for revenue?
Well, it is going to come up during veto session, at least on the Senate side, so I was surprised to hear that. I thought maybe it wouldn't. So I can't tell you, Mary, what the outcome will be. I can tell you I voted against it, and I know that Rahm Emanuel has put a lot of pressure on at least the Chicago legislators. I even got a call from him to support the bill. And I'm not so sure. I think Karen and I agree with this, that maybe having a casino in Chicago is fine, but so many slots and racinos and everywhere you go, you'd be so close to whatever you want to do to spend money and gamble. And I just think personally that sends the wrong message. And for people who are addicts or are inclined to be an addict, this is just making it so easy, and that just actually in the long run costs us, my opinion, costs the state money. So.
It does. Well, actually, it's not just your opinion. Studies have shown that, Susan. See how bright you are?
But there's studies that show it the other way, too. So.
No, the societal costs are very high. Whenever I voted against the gaming bill, as I have for almost all the gaming bills. When I've polled people in this area, they really don't want an expansion of gaming, especially in this area. To me, the casino in Chicago does make a lot of sense. I think it would be a boost for tourism. There are a lot of people from other areas, so that's really the only one that I do support.
But let me just say this about the Chicago casino. As much as everybody, it's sort of like, okay, we don't want 25 casinos and, you know, racinos and slots everywhere, but we'll accept a Chicago casino. The problem with that is all the premier cities in the country do not have major casinos. There's not one in New York, there's not one in San Francisco, you know what I mean? So this would be a centerpiece in Chicago. And I think that is problematic. I think everybody has to think long and hard about that.
Other questions? Yes, over here on the side, gentlemen.
No agreement can be made on pension reform, like modifying pension systems to make them viable. What are the chances of something coming up via a constitutional convention? Is that a possibility, which would then open things up?
The question is, since no agreement can be found on pension reform, is it a possibility that we could have a constitutional amendment that would, convention that would discuss pension reform?
So we just had one maybe a year or two ago, and the decision was not to really open up the Constitution and do anything. That opportunity comes around every 10 years. Is it 10 years? I think it's every 10 years, thanks. So we would have approximately 8 years to go for that. And I think that, that's a long wait to decide which way you're going to go either way. And there's got to be some stability for the pensioners and also, I think, for the state's economy before then.
Other questions? Yes.
Could I go back to something, Melanie?
Certainly.
I think as you brought up pensions again, Jane, when you brought up pensions and retirees' pensions, I will tell you that I think it's called the Illinois Government and Policy Affairs. It's at the University of Illinois, sort of governmental think tank. They did a good seminar on pensions, and they had national experts speaking. And they did say that our 3% automatic, COLA every year, that increase is very, very costly. And one of the big things, as I say, I don't see a lot of stomach to change that, but they did point out that it's very problematic. It's very rich compared to other states.
Yes, your question.
This concerns any utility in Illinois. When you try to call them, it's a rabbit warren of telephone forwarding, push this button, push that button, use your cell phone. What happens? Is there any provision for people who are not technologically savvy? Any short circuit that is suggested by the legislature when they come up for rate increases to make it more accessible?
I think the question is for people who aren't technologically savvy and want to call one of the utility companies, and they get put into a rabbit hole of dial this, dial this, dial that. Is there any thought in all these discussions with the utility companies of short-circuiting some of that?
Well, I don't think it's just for someone who's not technologically savvy. I think it's everyone they get in, in voicemail hell as they're trying to call in. They clearly need a better way of communicating, but that is one of the components of the smart grid. About half, less than half of the money, but part of the money is to put a smart meter in everyone's home in the ComEd territory, because it really is true that when your lights go out, they don't necessarily know unless you call in. In this day and age, we really need to do better with that. So the smart meter would let them know exactly where the power is out, and you wouldn't have to call anymore. Does that help at all?
Or you'd keep your fingers crossed that they would notice that and come out and fix it. That's a leap of faith, maybe.
I should have worded it somewhat differently. Yes, billing mistakes, trying to find a human being to try and resolve an issue, those are often more difficult because at least when you dial in, you can push 1 for emergencies. But if it's not an emergency, you get put into this, mill of no return.
Right.
Yeah, the questioner has expanded the question to say it's not just in emergencies, but billing questions or other service issues that might not appear on this smart grid.
Right. I know that with a couple meetings I had with some of the staff at the ICC, they are very well aware of some utilities who are not doing a good job of communicating, totally not doing a good job. And if you have billing questions and all, I would almost call the Citizens Utility Board. CUB is really good about helping with things like that.
But Alice, I agree. I mean, it is complicated. I shudder. Sometimes I think it's worse for me to spend time on the phone with any of these guys. I'll just pay the extra whatever it is because I figure my time's valuable. Maybe not that much, but if it's like a $5 error or something, I'm glad you brought it up. I think as we look at some of these bills coming up, especially with the comment bill, I'll bring that up. I think it's important. Very important.
And I think that sort of in general, at my telecommunications seminar, legislators I was sitting next to a legislator from Hawaii, and we agree. We think the telecommunications your bills are just ridiculous. There are all kinds of surcharges and things. So I think there was a model bill from Florida, of consolidating and trying to get that. That's one thing that's on my agenda, to look at getting more of a streamlined bill. And I think maybe we could try to get the industry talked into it because they believe that the telecommunications is taxed at a much higher rate than other parts, than groceries or gasoline or anything else. But it's impossible to see. So I think they might go along with it because then customers could see that they're being taxed a lot on their telecommunications. So that's on my agenda, to straighten out some of our telecom bills if we can this year.
Can I just add Comcast? If you don't get service, they credit you. Unlike ComEd, when your service is out, you still pay. But with Comcast, I've noticed we get credits. I do look at my bill.
Yeah.
Got to give them credit for that.
And did anybody see the story in the Tribune that there's actually a section of the law put in, what did they say, 1997, that it was put in after some bad outages that you can collect, but the ICC has never really forced it or something. So that's on the list for the trailer bill, that to find out why they've never been able to do it, because I think they have to prove that they were wrong or through neglect or something, but still, not 1 penny was ever paid.
Other question? Yes, in the back.
Regarding ComEd again, as far as the investment in infrastructure, is there a provision to bury the power lines, up and down the North Shore?
No, but they, as a response to the storm, the storm about the storm, let's put it that way. There was quite a bit of a storm about the storm in ComEd, that as I've met with them, they have an emergency $150 million that's going mostly in this area for some of the problem areas that were uncovered, as I said, out 12 times in a year. And another thing that from Susan and I meeting with them, we tried to tell them that some people said they were always the last to go on. ComEd's policy is to do the big lines first, where they can get more people up quickly. That's their protocol. But they are aware that at the end of certain circuits, there are small groups of houses that are always the last to get on. And Anne Pramaggiore, who is the new CEO, said just the other week that they are talking about putting some money into underground in those areas. But the ICC rate cases have made it very clear that one municipality can't subsidize another. So if Lake Bluff, for instance, wants to underground all their lines, they would have to pay for it so that the ratepayers in Palatine or Evanston wouldn't be paid for it. That's a very clear case at the ICC, and it's about $1 million a mile. So when any communities go back to them and say we'd like to consider undergrounding, they usually see a price tag that no one would ever want to do.
So I just want to add to that, the 100.
Let me just clarify that we're talking, because I didn't repeat the question, and it's my fault. It's, the question was about putting a lot of the ComEd lines underground, and Karen has responded, and Susan wants to
I
add.
just want to add something to that. So Karen's right, ComEd basically said in this trailer bill, and this is not written in stone, but there might be an additional $150 million to be used for things such as burying lines. And she's also right when she says it's $1 million a mile. So Deerfield is an example who has had incredible power outages for the last 10 years. They have about 60 miles of lines. And that doesn't mean, you know, their city's huge, it's just all the lines. The way this would work is that it wouldn't be all the lines in any given community. It would be a major line that has, you know, I'm not an engineer, but would have an effect on some of the other lines that would not get buried. So when they came up with that, we asked them if they could prioritize. So how would you know if you lived in Lake Bluff or Lake Forest or Glenview, who's going to get what when? Because of the old, it's easy to pass a bill and say we've got this money, but if nobody ever sees the work done and they don't really want to talk about it, then we're going to be, you know, hitting our heads up against more brick walls. So for me, in that trailer bill, if they're going to do that, there's got to be a prioritization process. So those dollars would be spread across not just our area, but across the whole region fairly.
Other questions?
Just a follow-up to that.
Follow-up question.
When they're doing major roads, like 22 or 60, it just seems incredible that I know the $1 million mile is there, but it's certainly a lot cheaper when you're digging everything up to put it in. Why don't they concentrate on places where they're doing major roads? Because those are your major lines.
Right.
And put them in. We've just got through doing 60 and 22, and both of them are still above ground.
Yeah.
The question is, when they're doing road reconstruction of major roads, like such as 60 and 22, why weren't those lines buried in the process?
And they should have been, and I know Bannockburn worked really hard to get those lines buried. I think that if Bannockburn was negotiating now, based on all the problems that have occurred, they probably would have had a much different response. I think with, unfortunately, all the suffering that we went through with the storms, it's going to prove to be a benefit long-term on how, what kind of service we get from ComEd and what they start doing to upgrade their infrastructure. So I totally agree with you on that, and I think we're going to see results.
Other questions? Jane?
Is there no oversight on insurance? I'm particularly interested in long-term insurance. I've had mine 2.5 times doubled from what it was 10 years ago. And it's going to go up $1,300 every year. And it's a scam, really, because I'm going to be paying more than I could ever get from them. Is there no oversight in the state?
The question is there oversight in the state over long-term care insurance and the companies that provide that? Because the questioner has experienced rapid premium increases as she's getting close to older age where she may be using that insurance.
No way. No, she's not. No. She's just a hypothetical for someone else. No way, that can't be you.
But I think this is it is an issue. I remember when I was in the House, I worked on it. For people who have invested in their long-term plan, they find out that at some point it just takes a gigantic leap, and they aren't then able to make some of their payments. So I tried to correct that simply by making sure it's all spelled out, that these things can happen, these kinds of increases can happen. But unfortunately, it's spelled out in teensy-weensy type. Like, it's so small that, you know, you have to really get a magnifying glass and then some more, like, glasses to see it. So I actually introduced a bill that all of these kinds of rate increases or the possibilities have to be almost like boxed in 12-point type and all that, and I was not successful.
We do not have rate review in this state. Some other other states do. Yeah, yeah. There's very.
Just go right up to the sky and other kinds of insurance.
The insurance industry is very strong in this state. We have put in place some insurance reforms for consumers, more that if they deny your claim or something, that there's external review for that now. That was last year, the year before, we put that in place, but not rate review.
Another question? Yes.
If I could follow up on an insurance issue, I work with some retirees who have talked about Cigna and problems with teachers' retirement insurance program, and medical providers not wanting to take on retirees because the state has been so slow in paying the bills, paying the money to Cigna, I guess, and then Cigna for paying a medical provider. That medical providers are asking people to pay for the service and get reimbursed from the insurance company themselves. And that's based on, I'm guessing, the state being behind on paying its bills. Is there any idea of the time frame? Is it on a path to maybe pay down these obligations or maybe speed up the payments to insurance companies?
Yeah, the questioner works with groups of retired state teachers, I think, primarily, who have Cigna as their secondary insurance after Medicare, and they're before Medicare, and the payments from Cigna have been very delayed, and so in his experience, in some cases, the medical providers are asking the patient to pay up front and then request their own reimbursement from Cigna. And are they aware? Are Susan and Karen aware of that? And is there anything being done?
We're very much aware of it, myself included. I've had bills sent to, without me knowing it, bill collectors, so it has gotten better, and I think it's because we've had more flexibility with our revenue. So it is getting better, and I project that it will continue to, it won't get worse. And we're trying to work with Cigna to, hold off some of these, the docs and even the hospitals are getting fed up. I understand it. But, so it seems to be getting better, but it's one of these things that it's part of the budget issue that we deal with. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but myself, it's happened in my whole family. I go places and they won't take my Cigna card.
Other questions? Yes.
Is there any significance that the two of you are leaving public office at the same time? And if not, then why are you?
I was waiting for that question.
Susan, don't tell them we're going to start baking cookies. We're opening a cookie shop.
The question is there any significance to the fact that both Susan and Karen are retiring simultaneously, and also why are you retiring?
You go first.
I don't think there's significance.
No, it wasn't planned at all.
It's personal.
I was surprised when I learned about Karen.
So
was
was I.
surprised when she learned about it.
Yeah. There's not one reason. I still love what I'm doing. As far as, and I think that I've gotten better over the years. It takes a couple years to really learn the system in Springfield. So that I do enjoy what I'm doing, but campaigns get to be a distraction. People don't realize, Susan's now got a 4-year term, but a 2-year term is spending more than half your life running for office. So I wanted to sprint across the finish line and have a lot of passion and energy for the last 15 months without the distraction of a campaign. And I think I can finish up a lot of things that way.
And, it was one of those things that I was actually worried that I would have a problem retiring, or maybe I would get defeated, but I was always worried that I wouldn't know when to leave. And it happened just like this. I woke up one morning after the redistricting was done. I was pleased with the map, and I thought, this is a good time for me to move on. I didn't want to be a career politician. I always looked at myself as a public servant, and I thought it was just the right time to make that break. I'll stay involved at some level. I'm not sure how yet. I'll get more involved with the league, perhaps. I don't know. I've always been sort of a grassroots activist anyway. So I feel really good about it. I don't have any second thoughts. And like Karen, I will put my heart and soul into every day between now and when I leave office in 2013. Thanks for asking.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Is there any long-term plan to deal with the state's budget deficits? It seems that every year the deficit is taken care of in some emergency way, and then we don't know what's going to happen in year 2 or year 3 or year 4. Does anybody talk about long-range plans to deal with the deficit?
Well,
The question is, are there any long-term plans to deal with the recurrent state deficits, really?
If I could start, I think that while it's not a long-term plan, but the current plan to financial stability is about a 5-year plan to increase revenues, to make cuts, and to tighten our belt and look at other type of reforms. So it is a 5-year plan, so that the hole was so deep, I don't know that I think we were well aware, but we were going right down the toilet. The hole was so deep that we could have abolished government totally and still not solve the problem. So this is like a 5-year plan to get to financial stability, but it's going to take the 5 years to get there.
And so the other side of that is that we're not reducing our spending enough, certainly fast enough. And what'll happen in now 3.5 years when when this tax increase sunsets, what are we going to do? Are we going to renew that, the higher level of the taxes? Are we going to go back to the way it was? There are some percentages that we're going to keep no matter what. But it's one of the things I worry about. I'm not a mathematician any more than, I get the numbers, and unless the economy turns around dramatically or we make some major cuts, I'm not sure how that's going to happen. So it's a short term, 4 years, 5 years, however you want to look at it, but that tax increase is going to sunset. And I haven't seen what happens when that happens.
Other questions? Mary?
Since you brought this up, what do you think of the League of Women Voters suing the state about redistricting?
I love it when you guys are, go ahead, repeat that question.
The question is, since you brought it up, what do you think about the League of Women Voters suing the state about redistricting?
Well, I am somebody who believes that it's good to be engaged and good to challenge, and so I'm not opposed to that at all. I think that's healthy. Does everybody agree in here, or are you just in disagreement? I'd like to see the league being more proactive.
Ditto. And I don't know if that's why, but on driving here tonight, I got a call from staff saying, be available for a conference call about the map on Monday. So I don't know. Well, I know what that is. So what's that about?
It's basically giving up your right to, how can I say this? Because of, it's not the league's lawsuit, it's the congressional map that's been, is being litigated, that we should be available to provide any information on anything we know about how the redistricting went for the congressional map in Illinois. So you have a choice. You can say yes, I can be deposed, or you can FOIA, whatever, or you can say no, I don't want to be. That's the question. So I've already signed in with yes, depose me, get whatever you want, because I don't have anything. So
I don't know anything about it, but I think
that's what it's about.
I think of the maps, though. It's sort of the sense that the congressional one is on a little bit shakier ground.
Other questions? Yes.
Are there any plans currently in legislative form or otherwise to increase the amount of renewable energy sources in Illinois, for example, solar, wind power, that type of thing.
The question is, are there any plans in Illinois to increase sources of renewable energy such as wind power and solar power?
You may know that I organize a Green Caucus. We tend to get mostly the House members there because that's where I am. But while not necessarily about wind and solar, but we did a couple major things that we attached onto bills, the ComEd bill and a TNASCA bill, a lot of green energy and renewable energy stuff that we've been fighting for, net metering, energy efficiency, and other things that were put in there. Our renewable portfolio, our renewable standard is pretty high, 25% by 2025. We are, through the Illinois Power Agency, getting some long-term contracts in the state. That there's some buying, but not enough. Wind is really flourishing in Illinois because we've had an in-state preference, so there are thousands of acres of wind farms. It is really there. Solar, not so much. The Solar Energy Association had a tour just a few weeks ago. There was a house in Deerfield and one in Glencoe. Did you go?
I wasn't able to.
Okay, no, but we're not doing as much for solar. We have a little bit of a solar carve-out, one of the few states to at least say we should be working towards solar. So those things were put in bills, but none of it has officially passed yet.
Other questions?
Are we off the hook?
We may be done for the evening.
No arguments?
Well, I just want to once again thank both of you for being here tonight, and I know that on behalf of the League and your constituents, thank you for your service.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.